A lot of who I was based on achievement, appearance, and approval. That was how I was creating my persona, not intentionally, but it was just coming out that way. And I learned if you achieve, you get lots of great strokes, right? So everyone, whether they're an accountant, an attorney, a doctor, a veterinarian, they're all achievers and they get strokes for that.
Welcome back to another episode in the Healthy Lawyer Life series. Today, we are going to talk about how lawyers can redefine themselves. Because one of the things that we learn in the factors about dis-ease for lawyers is that how you see yourself is a very big part of your overall well-being. So let's welcome our guest, Dr. Bill, back. Dr. Bill, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be here once again.
Absolutely. Now, I'm very curious on your opinion of, or was there a story or an incident you saw that made you really embrace like this idea that we need to redefine ourselves in the legal industry, or we need to redefine ourselves as professionals?
Yeah. Yeah, there was, and then with hindsight and maturity, figuring out what was going on. So you really have to begin at the starting place, which is for the most part in America, one of the key ways we define who we are is by what we do. So how often do you meet someone? Oh, hey, Terrell, we meeting at a party. Great. At some point, pretty quickly, I'm going to say, oh, what do you do? And you're going to say, I am an accountant, right? And I'm going to say, I am a lawyer, doctor, consultant, whatever I am, right? We use this I am statement. I'm a teacher, I'm a nurse, I'm an accountant, I'm a lawyer. That's like a to be verb. That's saying, this is who I am. And so we identify with that as a lawyer. That's why when people resign or retire and they leave their job, they often go into despair and depression because then they're like, who am I? I'm no longer doing that. So who am I? And so this kind of happened to me early on when, as I like to tell my kids, when I was in like middle school, I didn't really study very much. And I didn't do very well. I get like C's and D's. My parents were not happy. And I kept telling them ninth grade is when it counts, right? That's when it counts for your college. That's when I'm really going to start trying. And I guess they hung in there with me. And finally, in ninth grade, I really learned how to learn essentially and started doing well, did well in college and got to law school, did pretty well first semester. And in law school, they have 100% finals. I don't know how it's done in accounting. You got one test at the end of the semester, that's your grade. You get one pitch at the plate, home run, single, strikeout, that's it. Then you move on to other classes. So you don't get no dress rehearsals, no midterm. Oh, now I know what that professor wants. Too bad. You're never having them again. And so second semester, I didn't do as well. I got a couple of C's. That was devastating for me, actually. I hadn't gotten C's in a long time. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was truly crushing. I wouldn't have said it then, but I would say it now. That's because I had really defined myself as somebody who was going to achieve, a high achiever. And in retrospect, and as my wife and I have unpacked all of this, we realized for both of us, but I'll speak for me, that a lot of who I was based on achievement, appearance, and approval. That was how I was creating my persona, not intentionally, but it was just coming out that way. And I learned if you achieve, you get lots of great strokes, right? So everyone, whether they're an accountant, an attorney, a doctor, a veterinarian, they're all achievers and they get strokes for that. And suddenly I did fine, but I didn't do the very top of the class where I had been used to residing. And so that was devastating. I ended up, my solution, my strategy from then on was, okay, honey, when my report card comes in the mail, because that's how it came in those days, I want you to open it, tell me if I pass. And if it is, I'll keep going. If not, we'll figure out what else to do. And that was what I did for the next 2 years. I had no idea how I was doing until I finally finished and looked at my transcript. And the reason that was so hard, I think, was because that was who I had defined myself as, somebody who was always at the top of the class, always stellar. And and that came crashing down. And I think that's true for lots of people who have not encountered failures or difficulties in whatever place they're going to realize, no, actually, you're still alive and you still did fine. And this is not who you are. So that's that part of it. Let me pause there and I'll tell you some more thoughts.
I think that's very interesting because as you were talking, I was sitting thinking about the process that often that lawyers go through like this. You go through
Yeah.
undergraduate, you go to law school, and it's like the process is designed to be rigorous to
Yeah.
make sure that you are prepared. But in that process, it's shaping how you see yourself in that
Right.
process.
Right. That's exactly
And
right.
and it feels like afterwards, that shaping that you just went through to be a great lawyer, to serve clients, that has now, and I guess you say, redefined who you are. So when you go into the world, you're still carrying this reshaping. And
Mhm.
I wonder, like, how many people ever stop to say, hey, how can I redefine myself now that I've gone through that process? I become a
Mhm.
lawyer. Now, what type of
Mhm.
lawyer do I want to be?
No, that's very insightful and correct because it is easy to do that. And then you're trapped. And in that, and yet what I would say is that's not really who you are deep, deep down. One of my children went to MBA school recently, and there was like the first week or something for freshmen or whatever you call them. And they were in these groups of, I don't know, 25 people somewhere. And they couldn't ask any questions for the first 3 days, like, where are you from? What do you do? Because they all came out of work, right? And I was like, what'd you talk about? Because, what's your favorite color? It was really interesting. And so there's this idea that we have in us this innate born, what I'll call identity. This is who you are. And one of the stories I like to tell is about my two dogs. One is a Labradoodle and one is a mutt. He's a hound dog. And people often ask me, "How'd you teach your Labradoodle how to retrieve?" And I just say, "I threw out a ball and he went and got it and brought it back." I didn't do anything other than just do that. And he just naturally did that. And he loved doing it in the water. He would do that forever. He had like web feet. He would just swim after it. The other dog, the hound dog, could swim, but whenever he jumped in to try and go get the floating buoy toy, the other dog would always beat him to it. He was not that good a swimmer because that really wasn't who he was. Now he could run full speed with his nose to the ground, smelling the rabbit that hopped through the yard last night. But and so part of it is this idea of there are just things about us that really define who we are, and that what we do then sprouts up out of who we really are. So there's this idea of your doing comes out of your being. So that dog is a retrieving kind of dog. That's really who he is. And so his doing comes out of that. And to him, it's fun. He's happy to retrieve all day long. I got tired before he did. And so it's this sense of doing that. And so the question for all of us is figuring out what is really that sort of deep, true identity. And then how do you express that in your context at work as an attorney? And so, maybe you're a person who is just naturally a peacemaker. They say we send Bill into any kind of conflict. It doesn't matter if it's home, church, family, neighbors. He somehow is able to kind of get everyone to just come together. And you'd be like, great, you're a peacemaker. Take that to work, right? As an attorney. Or maybe you're a great listener, or maybe you're a creative builder of things that could be buildings, or it could just be relationships or businesses or teams or things. And so it's helpful to try and think about yourself in that way because that's actually who you are. And then it's just a question of what kind of clothes or uniform did you put on today? But you're still bringing that with you into that. You're living into that, whatever the exterior is. Because again, in America, we define ourselves. I heard one guy say, we define ourselves by what we do, what we have, and what other people think of us. That's the
Wow.
American identity.
Wow.
What we do, what we have, and what people think of us. Social media is totally built on what people think of us.
Yeah,
And so
I
you
can
see
definitely see
that.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why a lot of young kids, as a pediatrician, you have these teenagers and stuff at a time when peer and identity are very mixed. And suddenly they're crashing because they don't look as good, or they don't have this, or they didn't get as many likes, or because again, it's based on what do people think of me, which is false, right? You're more than your job. You're more than what you have, and you're more than what people think of you. Those are just exterior things. And that's hard as an attorney because that's how you get business. I want everyone to think of me like this. So this is how I'm putting myself forward. So
Well,
that's
I
tough.
will say that this conversation will probably be one that my wife will appreciate, especially after she hears what I'm about to say next. Because for years we've had this interesting conversation where my wife is an accountant as well. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
there would be just like this, I guess, after a certain time, my wife is just like, I don't want to talk about work at all. We could talk about anything else
Yeah.
except for work, to where it's just like this intentional effort to, hey,
Yeah.
that is what I do. It's not who I am. There's so many other things that I could talk about. And in my mind, I'm like, but I want to talk about this and I want to talk about this. And I was like, I never fully appreciated that until hearing this conversation. You know what? That is right.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
other parts of us that we should probably, if I had to sit in a room and I couldn't talk about where I work, what I do,
Yeah.
I'm like, man,
Yeah.
I really have to work on
Yeah.
talking about something.
And the context of law has even changed and intensified since I was there a number of years ago, where the billable hour expectation is even higher than it used to be. And so essentially you end up with a lot of people who all they do is work. That's it. Do you read any books? No. Do you watch movies? No. Do you ever go anywhere for fun? No. How about family vacations? I work on all family vacations. And so that part has just taken over like this giant spreading wart that covers the whole body. And you're like, that's actually not good. That is not, you are more than that. And somehow we need to be like a person who says, okay, I'm suiting up today as an officer on duty. I'm a policeman. Later, I take that off and I'm just Bill, right? I'm just Bill. That's not who I am. And in fact, in my job in consulting, I really tell all the people I work with, don't call me Dr. Satterwhite. I'm not your doctor. You're way too old to be my patient as a pediatrician. Because I don't want to say that's who I am. Now, there's a
Mm,
context in which I have that sort of role and duty, and that's what I'm putting on and being in that setting. But it's a really important thing. And part of me thinks that's part of what contributes to the high alcohol abuse, the high depression, anxiety, et cetera, for attorneys, where it is twice what everybody else is.
wow.
Twice.
Wow.
Yeah.
So as we, I guess, wrap up the second part of our series on attorney well-being, what advice would you give or what practical
Mm,
tips would you
mhm.
share if someone's like, all right, I heard what Bill and Terrell said, and I want to work on redefining myself. So any tips or practical advice you would give for someone who's trying to do that?
Yeah. So there are a couple of ways to do it. One is to ask your friends. You know me, we've known each other for 10 years or 20 years. What? Forget whatever I get a paycheck from. What are the things you notice about me? And some people will say, you always make all of us laugh. You just can see this bright side of things. Or these other things about you are the best listener of anyone I know. Right. And so these are the things that they can identify in you, which you may dismiss. I have a friend whose daughter is an incredible artist. She can, and she did paint pictures of our dogs that captured their expression. I didn't even notice they had it. They do, right? I said, oh, I need to pay you for that. No, it was easy. I'm like, what do you mean? Oh, it took me 30 minutes. Anybody can do it. And I'm like, no, they can't. And so sometimes the stuff you're naturally just, you think, oh, it's no big deal because it comes so easily, but pay attention to that. The other is to think about what are the things I did as a kid that I just did because I love doing them, and think back to those. What was it about that? How do I bring that back to life in this context, where I am? And if you're a spiritual person and believe in a higher power like God, you can say, okay, God, tell me how you see me. And what is it? How would you say that I am? What are the words you use to describe me? Because I think God would describe both my dogs differently. Here's what I made Scout to do. Here's what I made Sam to do. So those would be the things I would think about as a little bit of a take home reflection.
Awesome. Again, thank you for this amazing part of this 7-part series. So everyone who is listening, be sure to come back for the rest of the series. So thank you, Bill, for coming on for another episode.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Law Firm and Finance Show, where we give you great content that helps you build a more successful law firm. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on all platforms and follow us for more content.